What's new in filmmaking technology this week? News, reviews, education, insights, opinions, and ideas from the CineD newsroom with Nino Leitner and Johnnie Bahiri. This is Focus Check, the weekly Cinetech podcast.
Welcome to episode 17 of CineD Focus Check. I'm here with Johnnie and Graham, all the way in LA. How are you guys?
Good. I'm here quite well.
Hello.
And Graham, how are you?
I'm good. I'm just getting used to these new podcast hours. I feel good. I'm a couple coffees in.
Yeah. It's what, like half past 12 in the middle of the night for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
10 till 1 a.m. California time.
we pride ourselves to work 24 hours around the clock, so obviously you're justifying this. Very nice.
All right, let's dive right in, actually. I mean, I have to say we're recording this a little bit early, but by the time people are listening to this, Cine Gear will be long over. But you covered Cine Gear with a lot of great videos, which we have published on CineD. And we did a little bit of a wrap up last week of some of the stuff that was covered until then. Now everything is out. Now, before we dive into the individual things one by one, maybe let's just hear from you what your impression is of Cine Gear this year, because it's the first time it's happened at the Warner Brothers lot. At least from afar, it seemed like a much bigger show than it used to be, or at least in terms of relevance. And yeah, what's your impression of the state of the industry over there?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I'm constantly sort of checking myself, because I think, we LA/Hollywood types can rightly be accused sometimes of being like, we're the center of the universe in film and television, right? Which probably can be annoying for some people out there. That being said, Cine Gear was incredibly packed at the Warner Brothers lot. I don't have final numbers as of the time that this is coming out. And I'm always a little skeptical, like, is this somebody who had multiple badges? We've talked about that in the past. But, I'm always also making that comparison between NAB and Cine Gear. I guess the thing for me that Cine Gear has that's a little bit different from NAB is just that Cine Gear is entirely focused on film and television, things that at least all the people that are on this podcast right now, probably folks listening as well, are super hyper focused on. NAB has a few halls, I don't know if you guys agree, that are just a little less relevant for us and perhaps for our audiences. Cine Gear, every single tent, every booth felt like it was something that A, we're already using, B, has come out, or C, may come to market later and could be exciting, who knows. But it was all hyper-focused on film and television, what we do every day. Logistically, I think it's safe for me to say the handling by Warner Brothers wasn't 100%. Parking ran out very quickly by noon the first day. They were actually not letting people register anymore. So there was also, I think, the first day not enough security for the facility. So people were kind of wandering down different sound stages and areas where they maybe shouldn't have been. So from a logistical standpoint, I think Warner Brothers learned a lot the second day. But the first day was a bit intense. So yeah, is the relevance of sort of Cine Gear versus NAB versus IBC is an ongoing debate that we're probably going to have all the time. But this Cine Gear had the most energy post-pandemic that I've seen from a trade show. And there was, I know it's a long answer, there was some debate amongst the manufacturers, why are all these people here? Is it because none of them are working on television or film projects in Los Angeles? So, leave it to us to see the good and potential bad side of Cine Gear 2024 being packed. And I think I'll leave it there. But those are my first impressions of Cine Gear.
That's funny. That kind of would have been my next question, actually. Were there a lot of people because nobody's working right now? I mean, we know the industry is hurting, especially in the US after the strikes, maybe before another strike, with all the streamers cutting costs. What's your impression on that in general? Like, do you feel like your peers are a lot of them working, or you really feel the pressure?
Yeah, you know, I was speaking to, shout out to Erica that has the FreeMe Crew app. She is a local 600 assistant camera op. And, you know, she was mentioning things just generally are fairly slow for the industry. And that's been her perspective. And I think that's right. I think the reality is when the industry sort of shrinks in terms of output, department heads and directors of photography and gaffers and production designers, you know, those folks tend to be employed first and their teams shrink. So if you're a second AC or if you're, you know, grip number 4 or 5, this is an especially difficult time for you now. And then, you know, in general for department heads and directors and things like that, there are just seems to be less projects happening right now. So yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. You know, I will say that it seems like a lot of production has moved overseas, especially to Europe, to the EU, as well as to some of the Asian markets. So I'm speaking from a sort of LA, Hollywood-centric mindset right now. So it's possible there's still a ton of production going on outside of North America.
Graham, so you described Cine Gear when it comes to logistics and bureaucracy. But in terms of industry trends, did you spot anything that you really liked? Anything that caught your imagination? Some new blood, spirits, something?
You know, one thing I feel like NAB has over Cine Gear is at NAB, if you sort of wander the back areas, I tend to run into people that I've never met, never heard of even, that have a product that none of us here have heard of. So I will say that NAB, there's a higher likelihood that you might discover something. At Cine Gear, there's a lot of the old, you know, favorites that happen at these sort of trade shows. But going to industry trends, I mean, you know, I'm still blown away by how much affordable cinema grade optics are still available out there. The slightly pricey Viltrox full frame zoom aside, their DZO has $2,000 full frame covering primes that are out, and it just seems like we just have such an incredible amount of choice as filmmakers, which has been just very, very cool to see. So trends-wise, maybe less of a lighting-centric year for everyone. I think, you know, I feel like the LED industry, the film light industry has calmed down a little bit. And I think that's actually for the best. We don't need a new sort of LED Bowens mount monolight every 3 months. So that's been nice to see that calm down a little bit.
But when you talk about optics, don't you fear it's a bit of a race to the bottom? You know, it's like, obviously, the optical performance of so many of those lenses is becoming really good. The competition between...
You mean race to the bottom in terms of price? Or?
Yeah, because it's like, it used to be a very much Japanese-dominated area, yeah. And now when the Chinese are kind of catching up, and they're not anymore copy-pasting, they're really doing good stuff. I mean, they're investing a lot of money in machinery, in personnel. They're actually employing a lot of Japanese engineers in their factories. We know this for fact. So obviously, the quality, the optical quality is becoming better, but the prices are really, really crazy. And I think in the long run, it will be an issue also for the Japanese manufacturers. But what do you think? Don't you think it's kind of a race to the bottom at the end?
Well, look, I want to throw this question back to you guys in a second here, but the definition of race to the bottom, just to unpack that a little bit, like, sure, the price points are getting lower, but it's all, in my mind, part of the ongoing debate about optical perfection versus character with quotes around it, right? How much character are we fine with in our lenses versus optical perfection? So can I toss that back at you guys? Are you looking for more character these days from your glass? Are you looking for more perfection in terms of just sharp from edge to edge? You know, what do you think about that?
For me personally, not perfection. This is
So you want
like
character.
the perfect kind of lens in sense of clean image, and then kind of destroy it within some filters or whatever. This is less appealing for me. I already want the image to be interesting. When I look at it, it does something different. And I'm talking from the independent documentary shooter. Yeah?
I think we're all almost in the same camp here. I also want character. I mean, it just simply as cinematographers, filmmakers, I mean, especially camera people, it puts control back in your hands. Because usually we're not the ones editing our own footage, so like if you deliver a optically perfect image that's boring and flat, but it's perfect, it kind of gives the post-production more opportunity to mess with it in a way, and you have less control over it.
I didn't mean mess it in post-production, but for example, Nisi Athena is a good example. It's a very aesthetically speaking, the lenses are very clean. They have less caricaturistic. Maybe optically speaking, they're even better than others. But that means that, of course, you can still manipulate the image with some filters and so on. But the question is, and back to you, Graham, would you prefer like clinically clean image that you can destroy or distort with some filterization, or you prefer something that already is maybe less sharp in the corners but has some authentic aesthetic to it?
Well, I don't know. So you asked me earlier, Johnny, about industry trends. I don't know how much Apple TV you guys are watching or Netflix sort of science fiction projects, but Apple Television in particular, all of their shows have a look that's I mean, I'm painting with sort of a broad brush here, but I'm saying, morning show, Constellation, very sharp. I don't know if you've noticed this. Netflix too, a lot of their projects are very, very sharp. Recent series with tons of characters. Shogun pops out, obviously the Poor Things feature film from the last Oscars pops out. So I am seeing it. So it's a constant, you alluded to post, Nino, it's a constant battle, spirited discussion between filming something with character in the field versus burning it in for post. I've had a lot of conversations with post folks that end up something like this. Okay, Graham, you can shoot 95% of this, series on X glass with character. However, the remainder of that has to be spherical, very sharp edge to edge, quote, perfect glass for some heavy VFX shots. So, I don't know. I just actually wish some shows I'm seeing now did have a little bit more softening filtration added, or optics that are a little less sharp, actually. One thing we don't talk about too. Oh yeah. Sorry, Nino.
No, I'm just saying. I wanted to say I'm a bit surprised at what you said about the Apple TV stuff because we did have a podcast with Marcus Förderer on Constellation, and I watched the show, and it didn't feel like it's super sharp. You know what I mean? It's like the first two episodes are in space, and they look very different from the rest of the show in a way, because most of the rest is on Earth, and then maybe it becomes more sharp, whatever. But there's very heavy, anamorphic flaring and out of focus stuff in the first two episodes. I think that makes it a little bit dreamy. So I don't know if I agree fully on that. I get your point though on a lot of those typical Netflix kind of, I don't want to. It's almost like assembly line kind of type series, you know what I mean? It's like they do a lot of reality, but they also do a lot of stuff that's kind of like it's like this other show that you've seen, you know what I mean? It's like the algorithmic thing. Something worked, so they are commissioning something else. That's a kind of typical Netflix thing, or has been for a long time. And those things definitely tend to look just optically perfect, and from a cinematographic standpoint, sometimes a little bit bland. But yeah, I guess it's that this constant battle. I think we all feel it. It's always a battle between, also in the end, it's the producers who want to retain control over what it looks like like the finished product, and then the creative people I mean, both directors and cinematographers want to have more control as well. So I guess it's a give and take. But in general, I think all those manufacturers, coming back to the gear, that are now building lenses with character are simply doing this because they see the popularity of something like the K35s, the Kowa, and all those, and a lot of vintage optics in general, and try to emulate something like that. We know that from the V35 project, but also from a lot of other manufacturers that make less expensive glass, and they are trying to emulate lenses that have really become like vintage lenses that have become extremely popular and thereby also very expensive and unattainable for a lot of people.
Well, can I ask you a question though? That none of us being optics engineers, unless you secretly became one while I wasn't looking, wouldn't you say it's easier to create, lenses with character because character, quote unquote, was a flaw 10 years ago?
Well, I guess, yeah. I mean, if
depending on the attribute, depending on,
I'm sure it's easier. I think the consistency is the difficulty here. I think we know that the optically perfect lenses, they always, like Sigma lenses or Zeiss lenses that are really mostly about optical perfection. Those are real engineering marvels in a way that, especially the wider angle glass, like if you want a wide angle that's sharp edge to edge and stuff like that, it's hard to do. Or a zoom lens that is performing well at every focal length, that's something that's not easy to do. So absolutely, I think, and we've seen this with, some of the earlier zoom lenses from some of the Chinese manufacturers. They actually marketed them as more vintage looking. Like, for example, I was testing the DCO film Rangers. They look nice, they looked a bit dreamy, but the dreaminess comes from the fact that, of course, they're not as optically perfect as a Sigma zoom, but it adds character, but it makes them also smaller. And if you run them through all the technical tests, I'm sure they wouldn't perform as well as a, Master Prime or something like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, or a Zeiss Otis or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm just saying we have all these lenses with character. Everyone just has to be a little more careful when they use these from project to project, especially on some of the more affordable options, because I just noticed that the sharpness varies heavily between all the way open and like T5.6, which is mostly always the case, except you can have a really soft image depending on what type of prime you're using at what focal length. So everyone out there, just be a little more careful with some of these affordable options. Not naming anyone specifically, but just test in advance, like we always say.
Personally, I would be very interested to learn more about the tuning, because we talk a lot about those lens tuning. I would love to see how it is actually being done. I would love to see when DoPchoice or any other respected V35 guys, I mean, there are plenty out there right now. Take a certain Tokina lens, for example, or any other lens, and actually when they say we are retuning it, what does it mean?
Detuning it.
Or detuning. What, like, is it really adding another layer of to the glass itself, like another layer of coating, or how do they do this exactly? Not the mechanical stuff. It's more about the optical stuff. This is what I'm really interesed.
Well, I guess they're taking some sandpaper. Yeah, sorry.
Tribe 7 famously offers many different flavors of their Blackwing primes, but the price point on those, I mean, we're talking like $100,000 for a set, so they're rental only for most. And even then, though, there's still like 5 flavors, right? I might have that slightly wrong. 4 or 5 flavors. What I would love is just I'd love 60 different check marks, and I can just pick, and it can show me in a slide. Maybe we'll get there in 10 years, where I can be like, I want this lens, and it's called the Gram lens. You know what I mean? And it has this look that I just plugged in. Hope maybe we'll head that way. I don't know. Wouldn't that be cool though?
Well, I think like with Marcus's CineFlares database, like you kind of have the overview, but we were talking about this before. I think at some point there will be an app or whatever to kind of like, you have the perfect lens on your camera, and then like picture profiles, you can, apply looks, I guess, that will bake it into the camera, like different lens looks.
Well, we have the Model 8 from Moment. They're actually doing something similar in a way because they offer, I think, at least 3 types of adapters to mimic a certain look. So, of course, it's in between the lens and the camera, but that's exactly what they're aiming for.
But let's stick with lenses while we're talking about Cine Gear and just talk about the lenses you covered, which are, that you mentioned them briefly. The DCO film introduced a new series of cinema primes called Arles, like the town in France. Your image was gone for a second. Okay. Sorry. What's going on? Oh, okay.
I'm still here. Hello.
Just have to cut that out. Yeah. Okay. I'll do this intro again. While we're talking about lenses, let's stick with the lenses you covered at Cine Gear. So you briefly talked about the DCO film Arles series, a new set of cinema primes. What's your impression? Do we need another set of cinema primes at this point in time? I think those are spherical, optically, quote unquote, perfect lenses, right?
Well, I mean, it fills out sort of the product catalog, if you will, from DZO, right? In the sense that, well, now they have full frame coverage, T1.4, covers a big image circle. I want to say it's 46.5 millimeter off the top of my head. But so, I mean, if you're a completionist as an engineer at DZO and you're like, well, okay, this is kind of the next place for us to go, $2,000 a prime is a pretty amazing price point for something that covers full frame, that does have that sort of, clinical, quote unquote, perfect look. Again, we say this without me having actually tested these primes in the booth. I see actually comments about this sometimes where it's like, in your review at the trade show, you said X. We actually really try not to kind of give our final thoughts at a trade show because A, very often those are prototypes, as you guys know, and B, it's just never a perfect testing environment at a show like this. But yeah, back to the Arles, I mean, again, time will tell. I do wonder, like, how many full frame covering primes can the market sustain? I don't know. This is a 5-lens set here from DZO. I don't know.
Well, at the end, it will come down to expensive lenses, which you can find in rentals. Basically, those are not end user lenses, and lenses like the latest DZO, which are really for the end user. Those should be very affordable and such, but I'm also very curious. That's what I meant before. It's becoming so saturated, and you can see it's kind of we talked about trends before. Seems like many of the Chinese companies, they look at the market and say, gimbals, okay, so everybody makes a gimbal, and then everybody will make suddenly audio stuff, and then lights, and then lenses.
Yeah, I mean, there are. Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised we haven't seen a proper cinema lens, like with gears and all the bells and whistles that you want, that also can do autofocus. But there's not a single one that I can think of. I mean, we mentioned this before. Like last week we talked about the new 35 millimeter lens from Canon for RF mount, which is targeted as a hybrid lens, but when you look at it, you realize, well, it's a photo lens that, it's like from the housing, it's a photo lens. It doesn't have any gears, and even if you put gears on it, it doesn't have hard stops. So when is somebody making a lens with hard stops and like 300-degree focus barrel and, point-out pitch gears that can also be switched to autofocus? Like we haven't seen that. That must be very hard to do. Because I think there's definitely
you have the LiDAR, the DJI, sort of third-party options, but I know what you mean, like built into the lens. Or a LiDAR. Well, the LiDAR, I mean, that's really, really revolutionary in that sense, of course, that you can make those lenses autofocus, but still it's an extra thing. And I'm just thinking, look, for those shooters, like many that are switching back and forth between working with the first AC and then focusing themselves, and like this happens more and more, I think that would be a really, really good market to get into. Also for established companies like Sigma or Zeiss and all the big ones that are that have lenses in both departments.
I wonder. Yeah, it must be really hard to do because that's something we've been waiting for such a long time.
Well, I think the whole autofocus thing is basically a bit more complicated, and don't forget that this is also a little bit more reverse engineering. Not all manufacturers, or should I say Chinese manufacturers, are doing those autofocus by licensing. So first they do, and then so it's a bit of a complex thing, and I don't think that you want to maybe invest so much money into this and then suddenly have a company blocking you from actually using a protocol. So
I mean, the most difficult thing, of course, will be to make such lenses could probably not be mount interchangeable because the mount needs to have the electronic connections. But for example, Zeiss is an official licensee of the E-mount, right, with the Batis series. So I guess if they could do the rest, and they have autofocus lenses for E-mount, so I guess they could, and they do cinema lenses with the compact primes and so on, of course. So, all the elements would be there.
Like so I guess it's hybrid.
I guess it's an engineering challenge. Yeah. Good.
Okay.
I wonder how much of just autofocus, right? The subject of autofocus. I wonder how much of it is camera side and how much of it is lens side. I would have guessed like 60-40 camera being the 60%. I don't know.
Well, I think, of course, when it comes to a manufacturer who is making cameras and lenses, those are talking together at a certain way. They're also optically correcting in a certain way, so the lens is even better in some ways. Yeah, because you can control some of the lens behavior optically. But I think when you license a protocol, then to anybody else, that it should be seamless. It should be the same performance. Yeah.
Before moving back to Cine Gear, let's maybe stick with the subject of lenses. You actually, Graham, did a review that we just published on IronGlass Mark II, Vintage Optics Reborn. Now, this is a very special company, comes out of Ukraine, and somehow they managed to, keep production up, actually. During those crazy times over there. So what's your impression in general about the company, the product?
Yeah, this was a bit of a different review for me because I think when you think, actually Johnny and I spoke about this off camera a little bit, but when you think about a lens review, you think you're going to kind of get a lot of shots through the lenses, and these are some of the most popular optics of all time. So much has been written about, Helios as the line itself. It made less sense for me to kind of talk about the flares and all that. There is a little bit of that, but I go mostly into just the process of ordering from IronGlass, and and you can send in sort of donor optics, or they can provide the donor optics and the price differences as well. But I also talk a lot about the build quality of the Mark II housing specifically. So to be clear, I never owned or rented any of the Mark I housings that IronGlass put out, but I was aware of them. And I think I picked up one or two at a trade show. But to me, the Mark I housings, no disrespect intended, felt pretty close to being a CineMod versus a proper rehousing. I will say the Mark II housings feel like there's something that can live in a rental environment and be absolutely perfection for years and years and years. Indeed, the Mark II housings ended up on the latest Dune 2 movie with Greg Fraser. So clearly they're being used all the time on large feature films, or at least they're headed that way. Yeah, so you alluded to it. IronGlass as a company, pretty spectacular to be able to, not only ship lenses, but acquire donor optics in the middle of a war zone and then ship them out of Ukraine all over the world. So, as I got into this review, the lead time was somewhere in 16, 18 month range advertised on their website, and they would back that up. That being said, I ordered my primes in 2021. And I'm not saying that as a way to disparage the company. A lot has happened since 2021. And since I put the review out, as I said, around 16 months, now the IronGlass team is saying, as of this podcast recording, they're saying they might be able to turn around orders at 12 months, which is pretty spectacular. So the main question I go in at the top of this review is you can buy some Helios glass for like $60 on eBay in North America. Is it worth the several $1,000s upcharge? And please go check out the review for the answer. But for the podcast listeners here, yeah, it is.
Very cool. Yeah, well, the images coming out of them are spectacular. I mean, it looks really, really nice. Okay. So how much is a set of those?
Well, they vary whether you have the donor optics or you don't. And some of the primes are different. And they've now moved into Carl Zeiss Jena. So in short, Nino, the pricing is all different depending on which prime you're ordering and if you have donor or not donor. So
but how does the donor thing work? I'm not familiar with that. So you
Oh yeah. So you pick your favorite Carl Zeiss Jena prime. Maybe you have one on your shelf. I don't know, that you've previously collected. It's a good copy. You mail that to Ukraine. They rehouse it and they mail it back, and that saves you, 1,000-ish. Don't quote me on that. Dollars on the overall order, as much as like $1,500 to $1,800 US too in savings, depending on which primes you're getting. So yeah, you can save a little bit of money if you do the work of finding the perfect copy, vintage lens.
Interesting, very interesting. Great. Let's move on to some other stuff from Cine Gear. You mentioned the FreeMe app before. I mean, that is something that we didn't cover actually last week, but maybe you will, because I wanted to keep it for this week, because I guess it's something very North America specific. What can that app help me with?
Well, okay. First question. I should know this. Are time cards a thing on any productions? Time cards that you're on, Nino?
Not really. I mean, you mean for overtime or just keeping time?
We know you guys working.
How do you track kind of when your lunch should be?
Well, there's a call sheet, and then of course, I mean, you kind of take notes on your phone, I guess. And if there's overtime, there's overtime, and you enter a discussion with
and
the
then
production.
you kind of invoice for more. Is that how it works?
It depends if it's if you're on a feature set and you're employed. I mean, they will have to pay that out of the salary or something. It all depends on the contract. But yeah, as a freelancer, you would define if it's in 10-hour day is like the standard, and then sometimes it's less, but mostly it's like 10 hours. And then if you go over that, there's like contracts which say how much more they have to pay per hour.
Interesting. Okay, so yeah, I guess potentially useful for some of your work as well. So in North America, on a union and occasionally non-union show, and I'll go through this real quick because this is a little bit into the weeds here, but the time card comes from union productions. And it's based around, everyone has sort of a set minimum rate that could be negotiated higher than that. But the idea is that you have a minimum rate if you're in the union. Okay, moving on from union shows, non-union shows very often just copy and paste over that rate because I think the idea is they don't want you to flip a show union. Now, this is a much longer conversation we can get into in a different podcast about flipping a show union. But it's up to each crew member to track his or her hours as well as meal penalties. And that is, a certain amount of money if your lunch is 30 minutes late, right? And then, of course, that goes into overtime as well. But it's usually the crew member responsibility to track that. So there has been many times where I've been sprinting around a set or on the side of a mountain or whatever, and I forgot what time lunch is. Right? Or it's as my job as department head, if I'm the director of photography on that project, everyone turns and looks at me. The whole AC department, maybe a few of the G&E guys all turn and look at me and say, what time did we have lunch? All of these things. And this is not meant to point a finger at production, at the producers and say, oh, you messed up. It really, the intent from the union perspective is to avoid people being taken advantage of, not eating for 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, right? So the FreeMe app gives you a one-stop shop to plug in all that information or equally useful, to track all of your incoming and outgoing invoices as well, which absolutely very useful for you guys as well. So, and it's based around a monthly subscription model. I believe it's about $7. And currently, time cards are sort of the Wild West. They're incredibly antiquated. If you ever look at one, there's like 22 different boxes, and you only have to fill out maybe 4 of the different categories, but there's these 22 other boxes. So what do you do with that, right? So, long story short, this is meant for crew members, which is nice because all the other software solutions I've seen are made for producers. So you can see how there's a little bit of a conflict there. So I loved seeing this come from a member of the crew.
So you fill stuff in there and then you just, send them a link of your track times?
So that is the theory. Again, this is not something that I downloaded in the middle of Cine Gear and tried out. But yes, that is the theory.
Interesting. No, very cool initiative.
So you did not review the app during Cine Gear.
How dare you? In your review. Yeah. Okay, cool.
No, I did not.
Let's move on to Mutiny. So you did actually at NAB an interview. We did an interview. I think you led the interview about the new Freefly Ember. What is it, 2.5K, I think?
Yeah, you got it. Mm-hmm.
And now, so higher frame rates, lower resolution. Mutiny is a company that makes accessories for those. What did you see at Cine Gear?
Yeah, so I'm always sort of drawn to these kind of startup kind of companies. They've been around a few years. They're not so much startups, but it's I think just really 2 guys in Indiana in the United States making primarily accessories for Red, like the Komodo, for example. They make a ton of accessories for the Komodo, as well as kind of SDI isolators. I knew about them from those. But, they've gone all in on supporting the Freefly Ember, a camera body that's also coming out of a relatively small company in the industry, although very well known for like the Movi gimbal, the gimbal that started it all, not to go down that debate. But so all of this tells us, okay, it's interesting, the Freefly Ember not only is popular enough to justify a second version of the camera, but now we're seeing third-party accessory manufacturers supporting the camera, thus leading us to believe enough Freefly Embers, I would have thought a fairly niche camera, I'm an owner myself, of the 5K version, are getting out of the world to justify now there's a market for this. So it'll be interesting to see if more sort of dock reality projects end up having, shots at 2,000 frames per second all of a sudden, because now it's more affordable than ever before to get shots exactly like that.
Well, I think, it's a niche, but it's always good to be in a niche because there's not many manufacturers making high-speed cameras. And even here in Vienna, I know 2 people who bought an Ember. So there's, they're making waves, and they're simply, I think, more attainable than Phantom Flex.
Out of curiosity, how is the picture quality? You like what you're seeing from the camera?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a sidebar away from the Mutiny accessories, I guess, Johnny. But let me answer this way: the dynamic range is around 10 stops, which is funny because we all, at least I, very much began my filmmaking career with cameras that were like 8 stops of dynamic range, So, but 10, feels like much less versus, the 13, 14, 15 stops in some cases we're getting from some of these cinema cameras. So, honestly, my 2 cents is, if you clip your highlights on a Freefly Ember, they will not be there. They're just gone. So you just have to be very careful about your highlights on the Freefly Ember. And if you know that, and if you go in knowing that, it's a great camera. I will also say that the color science is Rec 709. There's no version of log. And then they have something that's a little more flat. For Canon shooters, we would call this something closer to a wide DR. And they call that HLG color. And that tints a little green for my tastes. So to boil it all down, Freefly Ember, careful of your highlights, and the color science is getting there, not quite there yet, but they keep putting out new firmware every day, so fingers crossed. And Mutiny has just put out a new power I/O for the Freefly Ember, which just makes all the power, and the input and output ports all integrated into a nice little plate on the back that can be V-mount or gold mount for, I think it's like $800 US.
Actually, not too bad for a high-priced camera like that, the accessory. I mean, talking about the high frame rates, I mean, to be fair, most cameras that do high frame rates actually significantly drop image quality as soon as you enter higher frame rate. I mean, even standard cameras like we talk about the Sony FX6 and so on, you go up to 120 in 4K, you will see a significant difference to the normal image, right? And by the way, just reminded me in the last episode we talked about, or I mentioned actually, that the GH7 can do 300 frames per second in full frame, in full HD. That is apparently something that the GH6 was also able to do, which I was not aware of. So sorry about that. Cool. Good. MoXIE, Core SWX, a very prolific battery manufacturer from the US, I would say, got creative and is trying to replace generators. What can you tell us about that one?
Yeah, so the MoXIE ecosystem, so Ross, the CEO of Core, explained all this to me. So I'm not in the G&E department, so I'm a DP. I do understand, though, a couple of the pain points that the MoXIE is trying to solve. Being generators require fuel and are very loud on set. So if you've ever worked with a generator, oftentimes you have to like run a long cable and put them like 50 feet away if you're shooting in, the forest where you don't have ready access to local, urban power. Also, my kind of issue with batteries in general are, they have a certain amount of cycles to them, right? So Ross and Core have made the battery cells inside the MoXIE user interchangeable. So user interchangeable, actually, it just takes just a second to kind of plop them and you pull it out and then you charge it. So you can charge other cells, say 30 minutes away back at base camp where there's power, so those cells can be charging. And then you can bring them up the mountain to where you're filming and slide that cell into the MoXIE and, so it's kind of interchangeable in that way. Yeah, so I mean, it's a great way to bring power to you on the side of the mountain when you don't have to use a generator. And because it has this sort of cells that are changeable, the MoXIE is not going to, you won't have to send the entire thing back in to change like the internal battery. So yeah, pretty cool. Core's doing some good stuff.
I have to connect this topic also with Shape. They have the on-power station that was introduced during NAB. So it seems as if some manufacturers are looking for solutions. It's costly, it's big, it's heavy. It's not for us, of course. It's not for the run and gun. This is really intended for sets, but there's some obviously companies are looking at this field, just how to innovate and make it a bit maybe more accessible and interesting. I think it's quite interesting.
Well, I mean, we all know the pain points of working with generators, I guess, and now that we are working with LED lights, we simply don't need as much power as we used to, and that makes sense to also replace how we get that power, I guess. Yeah.
Anton Bauer also has a larger, just in terms of physical footprint, solution. I think it's called the Salt E Dog, with a hyphen between salt and E and dog. I will say the MoXIE is about, I think it's 50 pounds, maybe a little more. I'd have to check the article, but it's two people need to lift it. So keep that in mind.
You mentioned small company before. Let's move on to another startup-like company, Mid49. The two founders of Wooden Camera, actually, that started a new company a couple of years ago. They also introduced some new stuff. I mean, they're all into still making cages and accessories for cameras. Some really smart designs we've seen before and covered in past trade shows. You talked to Ryan about something new they have.
Yeah, I think it's possible all of us have known Ryan for a long time. So he's been sort of a fixture in the industry, especially in the accessories side of it, for years and years and years, with a slight gap prior to starting Mid49. I just recently started using Mid49 products personally, so I'm a bit new to the company. I purchased the C70 audio adapter, was my first purchase from Mid49 about a year or two ago. And here at the show, they had a rainbow handle system, which I am a sucker for custom colors. And I should mention the MoXIE can be painted from core into a variety of different colors too. I just like colors. And the rainbow handle for Mid49 can be any color you want. It could be brand colors. I shouldn't say any color, but there seem to be a wide variety of colors available. And it just seems like a comfortable modular handle system that you can just keep extending and then add sort of curved elements to it as well. So from an operator perspective, everyone operates a little differently. Some people kind of go like this, some people maybe two hands at points, or they prefer hands on side handles and the AC grabs on the top, whatever it is. The point is that the rainbow handle system from Mid49 seems like a good option for everybody because you can buy it in like little 3-inch chunks at a time. So you want a 6-inch, 6-inch handle, you can have that, and then on and on and on. So pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's actually worth talking to Ryan also about other subjects because in a way, him and his wife really show so much passion for the industry. They obviously sold wooden camera and theoretically they could have taken the money and run away. But no, they came to the crime scene again and literally doing the whole thing from the beginning with Mid49. And I think this is fascinating. Maybe one day we have to catch up with them and just hear more about this, like why the struggle, how difficult it can be, and you insist on coming back and start from the beginning.
Well, his wife told me that Ryan just can't stop, he has so many ideas, and they actually took over the old original building of Wooden Camera, and I think have a lot of their former engineers still, so it's really nice. So they're kind of part of the same team working on new stuff. That's very inspiring.
Nice.
Yeah. Anything else you want to point out from Cine Gear that caught your attention? I mean, there's more that we covered, but
Snapbridge, you did an update on that previously?
Oh, no, actually, we can talk about it. Lightbridge and DoPchoice introduced a additional size of their Snapbridge, right?
Yeah, so I mean, they also, Jacob and Stefan from Lightbridge and DoPchoice, respectively, teamed up with Nicholas from Sao Paulo from a new company called Bluff Bounce. And so what Bluff Bounce is, again, having only seen it in person on the show floor, is a variety of different colors on an 8x8 or 12x12. I think they also make 6x6 dimension, material, and it has different colors on it, and you bounce a light into it, and it bounces back a more natural feeling light on your subject. So they took the Bluff Bounce material and then added it to the Snapbridge, the 5-foot Snapbridge, and now there is also a 3-foot Snapbridge. So yeah, and Jacob actually said something in the interview that kind of blew my mind. And he said, they were this is a quote, they were bouncing black on the original Alien movie. This I need to do more research on. Imagine pointing a light at a piece of black material and having it bounce back on your subject. This is all from Jacob from Lightbridge. I need to do a little bit more Googling on what happens when you point lights at black surfaces, I should say, because I use black stuff to flag things and cut light, like I think we all do. So anyway,
well, he has the black
subject for another time.
He has the black side of the Snapbridge, right? Which I mean, on that one at least, the intention is that you get a very soft but
negative fill,
controlled soft light that doesn't spill all over the place. Because the problem we know of those big chimeras and soft boxes is that you don't only point them at a subject. I mean, it always kind of also catches the surrounding. So I don't know. Maybe that's how they did it as well. I don't know. But pointing a light source directly at black to bounce the black Sounds interesting.
Bouncing black. This is a quote. Bouncing black was done on the original Alien. Someone in the comments who's like a history buff of lighting, please tell me if that happened and then explain to me why.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, you're right. Normally you'd need a grid or something, or a whole kind of castle made out of flags or something to control the light. Anyway, the Snapbridge is a very interesting product. I don't know if you have one at the office.
Yeah, we do have one here. I still need to review it, actually, but I've been using it on 2 or 3 interviews, and I like the natural look of like, it's very different from using a direct light, of course. I mean, it's just something you need to plan for. It doesn't need a lot of space, so the cool thing is that the whole, the back, what is it called? The actual umbrella type, like in the background, the thing that DoPchoice makes that you open up.
Well, that's the Snapbridge with the CRLS right in the middle. So.
That's true. That thing is the Snapbridge, and the filter, like the reflector in the middle. But the Snapbridge doesn't need a lot of space. So the cool thing is you can move it much closer to a wall, where you would not be able to do that with a big chimera in order to get a big soft light. So that's the biggest advantage. And then the cool thing is I found you can really use any light to bounce from. I mean, originally I thought it has to be hard light, but then I used a 1x1, it worked just as well. If it's a kind of pointy 1x1, you don't want it to spill over. It's a very nice soft light that looks like it's coming from a much bigger source, actually, which is nice. Yeah, have you used one?
Yeah, so I have one here too. I have yet to put, I used it on one show that I can't talk about, but it was very cool. It was one of those things where, like we always say, we need to test and try it, right? So Lightbridge makes a panel that's a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I just want to have it in my head. Maybe you guys are the same way. We're like, I'm going to use panel 3 with the black side of the Snapbridge in this situation. Yeah. So that, when I'm in the middle of the field, I can just be like, okay, this is a panel 2 with white side moment. I just need to kind of test it enough till I find my best practices for the Snapbridge. But I'm excited to keep trying it out.
Yeah, it's very subtle differences between some of those reflectors. And you can tell that Jacob is a very experienced gaffer, right? Because we did a long video with him on the Snapbridge where he explained a lot of that. So we'll put the link in the show notes. And it's a very good explanation where he actually shows with an actress what the differences are. But it is, definitely. I mean, it's something you need to learn, like which surface reacts in which way. And the differences are very subtle, but definitely have an impact. I mean, you have much more control of that light than using a normal softbox. That's the big advantage of that, without having a big bulky, setup that you usually would have, or a complicated setup. If you use their normal CRLS reflectors, you can also stay small, but in general, you will have to put up several of those, and it's simply too much for a 1 or 2 person crew to do that. There's a learning curve for sure. But I think the results speak for themselves. Looks very nice. Yeah.
DoPchoice and Lightbridge, it's one of those companies, both of them, where A, I'm very glad they've teamed up on this product. But B, it's always, how much more innovation can come out of the lighting modifier category. And I'm constantly surprised by those guys. It's just kind of amazing. And, time will tell with the bluff bounce. I'm very interested to kind of dive into that system a little bit more as well. So it's great. I like when manufacturers take their products and make a new product out of it, because that's good for us. It's bad when they're kind of holding on to their proprietary tech and not sharing it with one another to make a better thing. But, I think a longer discussion.
I think what we like here is actually the cooperation between the companies. I think this is like an ace. Cooperation, when you bring good ideas with brainstorming and really good mood. I mean, there's a lot of, you can really tell so much positive energy and synergy between those companies, and it's nice. And I think that's what we also like, is just this kind of togetherness.
Let's wrap it up with one thing we talked about already last week, but I just want to have your opinion on that too. What do you think about the newly teased URSA Cine Immersive? Like the two lens thing. Is that something you can see? It's completely new for a lot of us, and I just wonder a lot of like who's gonna put their toes into actually creating original content for the Vision Pro. Is that something that you think is on the horizon? I feel like it's in like all those early days of when there was this big 3D hype. You had a couple production companies that were really focusing on that kind of stuff, and then like completely specializing in this and making good money for some years and having good projects. I wonder, we still don't know where the Vision Pro will go over the next few years, but with Apple behind it, there is a likelihood that this will catch on, maybe, and they are in dire need of content for that. So what's your take on that whole thing?
My take is, so there's sort of the business hat Graham, and then there's the sort of fan of Apple. So let me kind of navigate my way through that. So I would love to know, and I'm sure Apple will not tell us, the size of the Vision Pro user base. I would love to know that, because I think, we saw this with sort of Meta's VR technology as well, that if you kind of look at the business of virtual reality from afar, and then you get closer and you start to squint, then you don't see the numbers justifying the technology costs or the user acquisition costs. And so if you squint further, it seems to me that that's all being propped up by Apple bucks and Meta bucks, that they're paying, for example, potentially Blackmagic to design a camera system like that. Because I just, personally, these are my words, I don't work for any of these companies, I just don't personally think from Blackmagic's perspective that there's a large enough market to justify creating a product like that out of nowhere that absolutely aligns one-to-one with the Vision Pro content capture specs. So we've seen this all the time in tech. What Apple needs to do is they need to lose money at such a dramatic rate that they get enough users to become anywhere close to that product category being popular with their user base. And if they don't get to that number in time, then the Vision Pro goes away. I think the Vision Pro life is suspect when it comes to average users like myself just wanting to watch the latest Hollywood movie on the Vision Pro. Where I do think it will continue to have life will be in enterprise applications in the healthcare industry, in unfortunately in some cases probably police forces around the planet, military applications, kind of a dark subject. But I think the Vision Pro could see use, especially amongst first responders, 5-10 years from now. Look up this podcast in 5 or 10 years and yell at me if I got it wrong. But I don't see enough people watching movies on the Vision Pro to justify a camera made for the Vision Pro yet, which suggests that tech money from the iPhone is being plugged into that initiative.
I'm so happy that we talk, Graham, really, because we are on the same side. I think Nino is a bit more advanced and daring here. He would love to see this being implemented widely tomorrow, I guess.
Well, I have my doubts. Of course, we don't know anything about that, but I have my doubts that Apple is paying Blackmagic to make this camera. I think if you look at what Blackmagic has been trying to do for many years, is getting a proper foothold in the cinema market, and we see that with the most recent announcement of their 12K URSA Cine full frame or whatever it's called. It's so complicated with their names. And then also the 17K. Now, and I think they probably are thinking like, well, if we are able to make a camera that is going to be the prime camera for the content on that platform, we might be the dominant force on that platform, because they're not in any other, right? They're not RE, they're not Red. And they probably just, we have the 17K. That means, we are the only ones who have a sensor that delivers more than 8K per eye, which you need in order to produce for the Vision Pro. I mean, Canon famously said that a couple months ago that there is no camera in the market that has a high enough resolution to produce content for the Vision Pro right now. Well, now there is, right? So I'm just thinking, we know Blackmagic is, compared to the behemoths of the camera industry, they're still relatively small. And I think they work with a relatively small team. So they probably okay, let's just try something and hope it catches on. I don't, and just having them mentioned in a keynote by Apple that's watched by 300 million people, that alone is worth the promotion, right? Because they also mentioned DaVinci, and DaVinci is free. So if out of those 300 million, I don't know, 500,000 are now downloading DaVinci, that's a gain for Blackmagic. So
yeah, too costly to do those experiments, especially for a small company.
We'll probably never know. We'll probably never know. But it's interesting that they're going into that.
Yeah, it is interesting, and you're right. The promo, the reach, the marketing side of it alone, probably worth Blackmagic's time. But
I think people look at the Vision Pro pricing now, and of course, it's completely niche. And even Tim Cook said in one interview that I watched after WWDC that half of the Fortune 500 companies are now investing in Vision Pro. He's clearly about the enterprise market right now, because that's where they see right now it's catching on. That's a mixture of price and simply the apps that are there are just not, I think for any of the private usages that we've heard is there's not enough to justify the expense right now. And that's, but I'm sure it will come down in price a couple of years. That's who has used the Generation 1 iPhone, right? That was a terrible product. It was a great technological demonstration, but it really only became usable from the 3G iPhone, which, you couldn't even install apps on the first one. But anyway, let's see where we are in a couple of years from now. But I think it's exciting to see companies, making products specifically for new distribution channels like that, which might catch on or might not. We'll see.
Well, it might catch on, it might not. But look, Apple is giving a vote of confidence, saying we think this Blackmagic product is worthy of our event. Got to make Blackmagic feel good. Nothing wrong.
Exactly.
Nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
All right. Should we wrap it up?
I think so.
Anything else you want to mention? We didn't mention the Viltrox Luna zoom lens, actually. Any thoughts on that? Relatively niche product, right?
I think we talked about it
last week.
Yeah.
But I just wanted Graham's opinion on that because we were a little bit torn.
Yes. Do you guys remember Sigma made this sort of gigantic zoom lens that was green and that you had to kind of lift, and it had sort of it was huge. I don't remember how many pounds. Sigma made this. Hold on, I have a segue here, I swear. And I should disclose, I'm a Sigma ambassador. They made this zoom, and it, to me, always felt like, wow, what a cool piece of engineering from a manufacturing perspective. You should Google this, just gigantic zoom. For Viltrox, it feels like that. It feels a little bit like sort of a little bit like a marketing tool. Like, look what we are capable of doing, right? That's kind of what it felt like to me. And there's nothing wrong with that, creating, an incredible zoom. Again, unclear the image out of it. Look, I was walking by that booth, stopped, did like a slow motion turn, because it certainly made me stop in my tracks.
Can you please remind us how much it weighs and how much it costs?
Yeah, so it's $65,000. I forget off the top of my head, 30-something pounds.
Yeah, 15 kilos.
But okay, but Canon makes a 50 to 1000 that's smaller. I don't think it covers full frame. But I'm just a little unclear about, who that's. I don't know. I can't come up with a use case for it, to be frank. The Viltrox product. I don't know who needs that.
Well, they're definitely competing here with Canon, Fujinon, that have lenses in that range and are much more established in this area. But the Canon is only covering S35.
Okay.
but I don't know. It's multicam with full frame cameras on big events. That's the market here. Sports, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you know, like on the sideline at the Super Bowl or the World Cup or the 2024, you know, Paris Olympics. You know,
maybe that's what they made. You know, that's what it's aimed for. I don't know. They wanted to show up at the Paris Olympics. Oh. Yeah.
Anyway. Maybe actually.
Good, Graham. One thing before we say goodbye, one of us for sure will accompany you next year when you are heading to Cine Gear. We will support you. I think it will be nice to bond again and do even more. Yeah, like always.
That would be so nice to have. Yeah, at least one of you guys out here. You know, final thoughts on Cine Gear. I know it's been a few weeks ago now. I don't think it replaces NAB. I don't think it's necessarily better than NAB. I can't comment on IBC. You guys have done that more than me over the years. It's just different. It's a different thing, and it's clearly becoming a little bit more important in the eyes of the manufacturers, as evidenced by new camera releases. So, and it certainly is very different. It's a lot of just film and television people, less sort of generic tech folk talking about cloud-based software. So I liked it because it felt like my people were there.
Awesome.
Other than you guys, who are also my people, and you weren't there.
Yeah, next year. I mean, all those niche events that are about cinema are really gaining interest all around the world. We have the same with BSC Expo in London. We have the EuroCine in Munich, which is kind of new still, and of course Cine Gear and some other events. But it feels like, you know, those smaller events that are now also growing one by one are simply more intimate little things where we are with our own crowd in a way. And it's just a testament as to how the whole cinema quote unquote market was growing. But when I say cinema, I mean people filming with large sensor cameras essentially for all kinds of purposes, because 99% of those things will never be shown in a cinema. But, you know, it's not, and it actually, you know, like a lot of broadcast is actually being replaced with those large sensor cameras. So yeah, something that looks nice, that is not that is not talking about clouds or OB vans and stuff like that. Just really the production events talking about those things.
It's also much cheaper for the manufacturers to travel to those smaller shows than the larger shows. It's just cheaper, and you are kind of closer to a more targeted audience. So that's, I think, a win-win for everybody.
All right, guys.
I hear good things about Camera Maj too, actually.
Oh yeah, of course. I didn't mention that because it's not technically an exhibition. It's more a film festival with an attached exhibition. But absolutely, that's the prime, definitely the prime event. And we actually, that's the main thing we should go to, honestly, guys. If you ever accompany me there, unfortunately, it's always in November and it always seems to be a very difficult time to attend for, you know, various other reasons. But honestly, that is the event because it's not only about the tech. There's so many cinematographers there
knowledge
that you can have very easy conversations with. I mean, you stand next to the biggest guys in the industry and it just can initiate a conversation over a beer. That has never happened at any of those trade shows before. And it's kind of, you know, like it's not really a secret anymore, but that really only happens there. Yeah. All right, let's meet at Camera Maj in November then. It's decided. I don't even ask you if you have time.
That's a deal.
That's a deal. Nino, I don't ask you if you have time.
Well, let's talk in November, okay?
Okay, good.
Great. Well, I have a dentist appointment, if you can believe it, in 6 hours.
Oh, wow.
So I have that to look forward to.
Yeah.
So good night, guys. Always fun. Yeah, I'll see you around.
Graham. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Bye. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Stay tuned for a lot more from CineD, of course, and next week's episode again on Thursday. Please don't forget to subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and give us a good rating. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.